Hi, everyone. It is so great to have you all here. I think the registration for this event and the turnout reflects how popular transit is as a topic in Surrey. My name is Denis Agar. I am the Executive Director of Movement Metro Vancouver Transit Riders. I am a diehard transit nerd. I used to work at TransLink. I did that for 10 years, designing bus routes and that kind of thing. And so this slide deck is going to be start out a bit on the academic side, but I'm going to try and make it as easy as possible to understand. There'll be time to ask me things if I go over the top a little bit. I love this map. This is a map produced by a piece of software called Remix. Shout out to them. They let us use their software for free. So it's been enormous help for our advocacy. But what this map does is it calculates how useful transit is for everyone across the region. And so each one of these little dots, the darker the color, the more transit access you have. So what does that look like in practice? Well, that high up arrow here, that's where we are right now. So 1.3 million people can get here in a 60-minute transit trip, 60 minutes or less currently with the existing transit network. I put a bunch of other stuff in Surrey on here. So Surrey Memorial Hospital, the number is a little bit lower, 880. If you want to get to Tamanawas Secondary, it's much lower. It's closer to 400,000 people can get there in 60 minutes. And then Semiahmoo Mall, 200. And I think people kind of know this, right? Like you generally have this like innate sense of how easy things are to get to by transit, and it's reflected in how many people use it. If I put up a map of how many people are using transit in different parts of the region, it's pretty similar to this one. People really get it. So ultimately, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is to expand people's transit access, which is shown on this map as those colors getting darker. So I did a different scenario, a different calculation, which was I added to the existing transit network a few other transit projects. I added the Broadway subway, which should be done next year, fingers crossed. The Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, which should be done in 3 years, fingers crossed. And the King George BRT, which isn't funded yet, but I really hope it will be. Double cross my fingers for that. And if I flip through it really quickly, you can kind of see how the blobs grow, right? Like the colors get darker where there's more transit access. And what does that mean for those people in these scenarios? That means 35% more people can get here in an hour. 25% more people can get to Surrey Memorial, 25% more to Tamanawas, and 75% more people can get to Semiahmoo Mall in a regular transit commute. Now that's on a lower baseline, but so be it. And I was doing this morning, and I got a surprise, which was this. So 1.4 million people can get to waterfront in this scenario. This is after the Broadway subway, Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, King George BRT. That's less than Surrey Central. And I think that's a really interesting bit of foreshadowing for the future of Surrey. In transit, again, this might sound really obvious, but if you're in the middle of a region, you're gonna always have innately more transit access because you're gonna be able to go in all directions. Whereas, that's why White Rock kind of does poorly on this metric because they're surrounded by border and water and farm. So transit is never gonna be incredible in White Rock. I'm sorry to say to some of the White Rock stands in this room. But Surrey's future is kind of in the middle, right? Like it's got, Langley growing on one side, it's got, Burnaby, New West, Tri-Cities to the north. Surrey is really well positioned to have excellent transit access and be kind of the new middle of downtown. And I know that's what Surrey mayors have, the message they've put forward for terms and, council terms and terms, but we're really starting to see it. This is a future that could exist in 5 years. So ultimately, how do we get the thing that we want? How do we increase transit access? Really quick transit expansion 101. Main thing is to make transit faster. So you can replace a bus with a SkyTrain. That makes it faster. You can add bus lanes. That makes transit faster. It's very cheap to do. You can add BRT, which is kind of like the best bus lanes imaginable. that also helps. And then you can do direct connections, right? Like if there was a direct bus from here, from Surrey Central to Tsawwassen Ferry Terminal, that would be a way of making transit faster. You can also reduce wait times. That's a huge and important one. If someone's wait time for the bus is 30 minutes, you bring that down to 15, that massively increases their access, and that's one of the cheapest things to do. And then finally, you can put more stuff near the transit you already have. That's something we don't talk much about, but I just have a slide here about that. Some of you may have already used the new North Surrey Sport and Ice Complex right by Scott Road Station. We're still using Remix here to show that about 95,000 people can get to that sports facility in a 30-minute trip. But the Surrey Rec Center that just got demolished is about double because of where it is, because it's closer to not only the SkyTrain, but it's closer to 30 different bus routes that connect all across the city. And so you can see, the map of people that can get to Surrey Rec Center, North Surrey Rec Center in a half hour extends all the way down to Newton, and you can see these fingers, like each one of those is a different bus route. So where things are matter. But anyway, how do we increase transit access? These are the three things. And then there's kind of this, if we zoom out, this broader question of how do we improve the lives of transit riders? We have to improve access, and we kind of already covered that. But in addition to that, we need to think about their experience, their day-to-day experience. So we need to reduce overcrowding and eliminate pass-ups. A pass-up is when someone gets left behind by a full bus. By the way, how many people in this room have ever been passed up? Sorry, bus full. Wow. Okay, check that out. The whole room. I was not actually expecting that to be such a slam dunk. Cool. We got a lot of work to do. Cool. In addition, we need to improve stops and neighborhood streets. We need to think about how people are getting to the bus, because that's a big part of the transit rider experience. People say in surveys that they actually weight that as more important in some situations. And then we need to make sure that the transit fare is not a barrier to opportunity. We need to make fares fair. I'll talk a bit more about all of these things as we move forward. But let me jump into how transit has changed in Surrey in the last 5+ years. This is a work of art, and this is way too academic for me to explain here now. But the main takeaways from this, the blue dots are Surrey bus routes, and the orange dots are everyone else's. The blue dots are above everyone else's. This just reflects how pure it is that's what's happening. Like Surrey routes are expanding and ridership is growing. And everywhere else, not only in the region, but on the continent, ridership is flat or down. And it's really remarkable how different it is. Basically, to make a very long story short, at the very beginning of COVID, we saw a lot of essential workers in Surrey need to get to work and kind of, flooding the system, like really riding the system when no one else was. People working in a warehouse, hospitals, kitchens, wherever it may be, they were encountering this sorry bus full a lot. TransLink reacted by boosting service in Surrey to levels that they'd never seen before. But they didn't have any new buses to do that with. So how did they do that? They cut a bunch of service in Vancouver. And so you can see here the really deep service cuts in Vancouver that happened since COVID, and the really massive service increases that happened in Surrey. And when you cut service or when you increase service, it has an almost immediate impact on ridership. So in Surrey, the service increases drew more people in because their wait times were shorter. I don't have to wait 15 minutes for the bus on 128th anymore. So it's only 7-minute wait. So people would start riding it for that reason. And the opposite is happening in Vancouver, where people are like, oh, I have to wait so long for the A. It used to be this show up and go situation. And now it's like, oh, I have to wait longer. So I'm going to go and get a car. I'm going to bike. I'm going to take an Evo, whatever it might be. So these things cascade. There's a death spiral is when it's going down, and a feedback loop when it's going up. And so just to zoom in on 2024 alone, we haven't seen the 2025 numbers yet. I'm really excited and hopeful that TransLink will publish them soon. And I expect these trends to be down a little bit because of changes in immigration policy. But in 2024, it was a really special year. There were 6 corridors where ridership grew by around 20% in Surrey alone. That is a huge and unbelievable number. Let's leave the region for a second because I want to talk about Brampton, Ontario. And it's a really interesting illustration and a compare and contrast with York Region, Ontario, which is right next door. Brampton, Ontario has gotten international praise for how it invested in its transit system and changed it. About 20 years ago, they set forth the strategy to just put more buses on the road. Nothing fancy, just let's increase frequencies, let's reduce wait times, let's just get buses on the road everywhere all across Brampton. Right next door, their neighbor, York Region, set out on a strategy about 20 years ago as well. Pretty much the same timing. They decided, let's make our transit system really flashy. Let's buy buses from Europe. Let's make them really nice. Let's do these cool stations and this red pavement, blah, 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 blah. But they didn't run them very frequently. And it turns out that's the thing that matters. This, for contrast, is just a plain old Brampton bus. The result today is that Brampton has 13 routes that run every 15 minutes or better, and York Region has 2. And the outcome? Brampton's ridership in the last 20 years has grown by 430%, York Region by 60%. So really, a lot depends on how much access your transit provides. It comes back to those blobs, right? Like the blobs in Brampton that have darker colors and are growing, etc. Another point I want to make is that it doesn't necessarily matter whether your thing is on rails or on rubber tires. So in Washington, D.C., similar to York Region, they got really excited and put in a new streetcar route when it was kind of a trend, like a couple years ago. They announced that they're pulling out the streetcar. It's happening next week, actually. They're shutting down the whole streetcar. Ultimately, it wasn't useful enough. It wasn't faster than the bus. There was still a bus on the same corridor that went to more places, faster, more frequently, and you actually had to pay for the bus. The streetcar was free. People were still using the bus because of how much more useful it was. And so they announced a closure recently, and they're like, the mayor says, we're going to replace the DC streetcar with next generation streetcar, but it's just a bus. It's not about what it runs on, tires, wheels, monorail, gondola. It's about the speed, the capacity, how good the environment is. Do you feel dignified being able to use it, or do you feel like a pariah? Is it frequent, and does it connect to the things that you want to connect to? Okay, so we're going to get into some of the elements of what makes it good here. This is a map of all the routes in Surrey, and the dark areas around them are like who can walk to those routes within a 5-minute walk at noon. So you can see these are all the routes at noon. Let's compare that with 11:30 at night. This is a lot better than it used to be, like 5 or 10 years ago. Like you can actually get to a lot of Surrey at 11:30 at night. Although you'll notice that this east-west route disappears. So it's really great if you want to go north-south, but if you want to go east-west, it's a lot harder. At 2 a.m., almost no network left. So that's a huge gap in Surrey. That's much, much worse than in Vancouver or, God forbid, Toronto. Toronto has an enormous night bus network, and that's something that we need to invest in. Overcrowding. Almost the whole room has been passed up by a bus, which reflects the fact that 14 of the 20 most overcrowded routes in the region are in Surrey. And then let's talk about bus lanes. So this is a map of the bus lanes in Surrey and the bus lanes in San Francisco. And you might think, San Francisco, it's a very urban city. Actually, the rates of transit usage post-COVID are somewhat similar between Surrey and San Francisco because ridership here is up so much and ridership in San Francisco is down so much. But San Francisco in 2020 went on a tear, and they just invested in bus lanes everywhere. We haven't seen that level of investment here in Surrey. Similarly with sidewalks. Surrey has a lot of missing sidewalks. These graphs, depending on how you count them, show around, let's say, 450 kilometers of street that have no sidewalk on it at all in Surrey. And right now the budget plans for around 3-4 kilometers per year of new sidewalk. And so what that means is that it would take many lifetimes to get to the point where Surrey has 100% sidewalk coverage. So we got to fix that. And that doesn't even, we're not even talking about shelters, benches, lighting for people to feel safe to walk around, and crosswalks so that you can actually cross the street in a safe way. We are also one of the only regions in North America that doesn't have a discount for low-income adults to ride the system. If, regardless of what you earn, it still costs $5.10 to get here from downtown where I started my day. And that makes us an outlier. Calgary, it goes as low as $6 a month. Winnipeg, $59. In Los Angeles, if you make less than $53,000 a year, you get 20 rides free every month. And in Seattle, it's $1 per ride if you qualify. So we are the outlier. So on a positive note, what is going to get better soon? Well, we already talked about Broadway Subway, Surrey-Langley SkyTrain. Both of those are maybe the nice thing about the new SkyTrains that we don't talk much about is that it means we're going to need a lot less 502s and 503s on Fraser Highway. So those buses get to be shifted to kind of where we want them to be shifted. So that means more frequency, better connections. I expect Cloverdale is going to look forward to a bunch of really frequent connections to and from the new SkyTrain, stuff like that. And then last year's investment plan funded a few small things. There'll be more service to Campbell Heights because that's something that Mayor and Council really fought for. It's an industrial area. They've been crying out for better service. Same with regional parks. And then there'll be a peak-only bus on 68th, which is like better than nothing, but there's all-day demand for sure on 68th. Anyway, here are some things that aren't going to get better without a fight. Chris really led into this perfectly because it really is important that transit riders get involved and speak to their candidates, speak to their politicians about what they're really looking for. And here are some of the things that I think will be big issues. Frequency and overcrowding. Not going to belabor that point, but we talked about that a lot. Night service, new routes and new direct connections. This map is taken from the Surrey Transit Futures document. We have a bunch of copies of those. This is something that movement volunteers made. It is incredible. It is something I had almost nothing to do with. I just got the joy of being able to read the final document, and it is so beautiful. Please take a look at it. TransLink is doing a planning process to redesign the bus network here, and we kind of got out before it, and we put our submission, our very detailed submission for what the transit network can look like after Surrey-Langley SkyTrain is done and after the King George BRT is done. It's really a path forward, but it relies on having way more buses, as does this, as does this. This relies on having way more money. So major projects, we talked about the unfunded BRT. There's also the gondola to Burnaby Mountain up to SFU that will benefit many Surrey residents who have to make that commute and takes very long today. And then, of course, UBC as well. The thing that's the most interesting about the SkyTrain to UBC is that it is more popular in Surrey than it is in Vancouver. And I think that's because there are a lot of people who aspire to better things in Surrey, right? Like it's a place with a lot of youth, a lot of parents who want their kids to go on off and be engineers and lawyers and go to UBC, and what better to get them there than a SkyTrain? They have painful commutes from places like Newton, Cloverdale, Fleetwood to UBC. So Surrey wants the SkyTrain more than Vancouver. Here's another thing that isn't going to get better without a fight, bus lanes. So it really takes public pressure to make this stuff happen. The good news about bus lanes is that not only are they very cheap to implement, they also save money. They can save TransLink money by making the routes faster. It's kind of a win-win-win. Once you make those routes faster, you can pressure TransLink to make sure that all of those savings get reinvested in Surrey, like the city is the one that generated those savings. And then you just get on this positive feedback loop where things get faster and better and faster and better. Similarly, improving this person's bus stop, please, let's make it better. Let's give them a shelter and a bench and a street light and a way to walk beyond just 5 meters there. So each of these things rely on different levels of government. And this is where things get complicated, and I swear I'm trying to make this as simple for you as possible. But ultimately, some things rely on the province, and some things rely on the municipality. And generally, the rule is if it costs money, it's the province, and if it takes space, it's the municipality. But that's not a perfect rule. Basically, the province promised last year to introduce a new revenue tool, which will essentially mean a new tax to pay for expanded transit. They haven't said what that will be. They haven't, there's a risk that they may not follow through, or that they may make it smaller than is needed to solve all these problems. And so that's where movement and everyone in this room comes in, to make the government, the province, feel that we really support them in doing that. We really want them to do it. We will reward them if they do it. Because ultimately it can buy us so many of these good things. So we can solve overcrowding, we can end pass-ups, we can improve frequency so that everyone in Surrey has access to a 15-minute, frequent bus route. We can blanket the city with night bus service. We can add connections to things like Tsawwassen Ferry Terminal and, Richmond and wherever you want to go. We can finally deliver those major projects like the 30-year overdue UBC SkyTrain. And we can introduce a low-income fare discount so that fares aren't a barrier to opportunity for people. Where it comes to municipal courage is around bus lanes. It can be some kind of scary. There can be skirmishes around bus lanes. Some people are opposed to them for one reason or another, but lots of cities across North America are putting them in, and the outcomes are generally really excellent. The municipality will need to spend money on sidewalks, benches, shelters, crosswalks, lighting. That is a thing that does cost money, and it is in the municipal remit, but it's definitely a worthwhile investment, not just for transit riders, but for the safety of your children, to give them the freedom to roam around their community. There are so many reasons to improve pedestrian infrastructure. And then the other thing that the municipality is responsible for is land use, right? Like putting more housing and more amenities, community centers, schools, stores, all those things. If we can put those things closer to SkyTrain, closer to rapid bus, closer to frequent buses, then we can really make a difference. And so, to summarize all that, what we're looking for from candidates, a strong emphasis on making buses faster and more reliable, on making bus stops and sidewalks better, an emphasis on putting more homes and amenities near fast transit. And then I have in gray here that we would like them to support increased transit funding, because ultimately it's not something that the municipalities control, but they can help set an agenda to set the terms of the argument with the province, that they can understand that not only do the people want this, but all the mayors and councils of BC want it too. Ultimately, Surrey has a huge head start on being a real transit metropolis. Surrey housing is already way more affordable than Vancouver's. Surrey's transit has improved over the last 5 years. Fraser Highway is getting that SkyTrain. And, shedding a car can save a family $15,000 a year, even if you're just going from 2 cars to 1. So I really do think that Surrey can become Canada's most affordable transit metropolis, where not only do you have good transit access to the things you want to do, but that you can actually afford rent. And it all comes back to this map. This is a crucial way of thinking about it, of making it happen, of ultimately darkening those colors so that you can get to more things without a car. By the way, just as a little epilogue, this stuff is super popular. That first screenshot is from Daily Hive. They're talking about how in the most recent Surrey budget consultation, the people of Surrey said that transportation is their number one concern, above safety. That second picture is the new mayor of Seattle, Katie Wilson. She was elected last year. She's the founder of the Transit Riders Group in Seattle. She ran on a campaign that just was basically like this whole slide deck. It was her campaign, and she won. And then the third thing, a lot of transit is funded in the US through referenda, and often they succeed. Around 85% of transit referendums in the United States succeed. 85%. And that's not just in like Seattle, New York, whatever. This is Nashville. Nashville got 66% support for a transit referendum that would put in a bunch of BRT across the city, sidewalks, crosswalks, all of the stuff in this slide deck. They called it Choose How You Move. and it was a slam dunk. So this stuff is really popular. I think it can win elections, and I'm really excited to have you all here. This is the end of my slide deck. Thank you. Okay, I guess I didn't talk too long because we do have time for a few questions. Thanks, Amin, for keeping an eye on the clock. Does anyone have any questions for me before we go to the panel?
Chris. So Mike Farnworth said recently, he's like, road pricing, never going to happen. Was road pricing ever going to help fund transit, or was that, like, where was that money going to go in? Is that something people should be still trying to fight for, or is that a good issue?
That's such a good question. So Chris was asking about whether road pricing is in the cards, whether it would help. This is basically tolling roads in one way or another. There are a million different ways to do it. The one that was just implemented in New York a year ago, they drew a line around central Manhattan, and they said, if you want to drive into this area, you have to pay $9. And when they did that, there was tons of opposition. It took decades of advocacy to make that happen. All of the money would go to funding transit capital investments, so things like putting elevators at stations that were built before wheelchair accessibility, so finally making those stations accessible. Anyway, it's been such a slam dunk success. It's made the city quieter, less pollution, less collisions, so the city is safer, more transit ridership, more business at the businesses in New York. It's just a more pleasant place to be. So congestion pricing is absolutely part of the solution. It can work. The current provincial government is dead set against it, so I don't talk about it very much because it feels like we're not ready as a province yet, and it's probably right to focus on other ways of raising that money. But it's important, I think, to keep the fire warm for congestion pricing. The other piece of this is that you can see technologically that autonomous vehicles are quickly growing and are going to be a thing very soon, I think, in our society, just a normal day-to-day thing here. When you make a car autonomous, you make it much, much cheaper to operate, especially when they're electric autonomous vehicles. That's like two ways in which driving has become very, very cheap. And when you make driving very, very cheap, like imagine a taxi that costs half of what it does today. When you do that, you just put way more cars on the road, because when you make something cheaper to consume, people consume more of it, like universally. And so what I'm really worried about with this increase of autonomous vehicles is just like gridlock, like instant gridlock. And so I think it makes sense to talk about road pricing in concert with the introduction of these autonomous vehicles, so that there's like a per kilometer fee that's immediate. Like we don't let a single one of those cars touch BC streets until that road price is applied to them, so that we can avoid kind of the worst gridlock, and then all of that money can go towards putting in bus lanes and SkyTrains and all the good stuff we just talked about. Did I correct my time? Okay.
Hey Dennis, Jazzer Gosel, I'm running for council with Surrey First. You talked about the need for investment in some of the areas where there is density happening. What we have wanted to see is the DCC's, development cost charges that are charged to developers, being used for projects within those areas. And some of those projects might be sidewalk enhancements, bus lanes, what have you, right? Bus shelters and anything else the municipality can do. Is that one way that you think that the municipality can utilize money that it's already going to get through densification to enhance transit in certain areas?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much competition for that money. Like when a new apartment building gets built, there are a lot of potential ways to use that money. And I certainly would love to see it be used on improving the pedestrian environment, improving sidewalks. I fear that it's not enough, but it's absolutely hugely helpful. One fun thing about that I think a lot of people don't realize, and I was really surprised with, is all of the routes that I showed, like the ones that increased the most in ridership in Surrey, are in places that haven't really seen a lot of housing construction. Like places like Sullivan, Grandview, places where houses are going up really quickly are still relatively suburban and pretty hard to use transit. Whereas the places that have had the biggest jumps in transit ridership are places with, big multi-family or multi-generational households on streets like 128, closer to King George, closer to 152. And there are no DCCs coming in those places, unfortunately. And so at a certain point, you just need to spend those property taxes. Yeah. We're good? Oh, we're out of time. Thank you so much, folks. I got the hook.
Do you mind if I just ask a question too?
Sorry, there was this gentleman over here waiting for a question
Yeah,
since the beginning, so.
We're running tight, so
Okay.
a minute max.
Okay.
Quick question. I feel like my voice gets drowned out when we all talk to the politicians in TransLink. So what advice do you have for just me advocating for myself as an individual and for the community, like realigning the 326 goal, like as goal?
Oh yeah, excellent question. To cut through the noise, it's easy to make an email, it's easy to generate an email. So if you can call or if you can say hey, I'd love to meet with you sometime, depending on the politician's workload, they may actually be willing to do that. To whatever extent you can kind of be a real person and don't let them think that you're a bot. You know what I mean? That's my short answer. Yeah, no problem.
And just one last one.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Janet Brown, I'm running with Surrey First as well, with Linda Annis for council. My question to you, if I may, light rail transit and buses. Do you think it would be more valuable to invest in additional buses and bus routes rather than LRT if we had to choose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's totally meaningless, the distinction between light rail transit and buses. And currently, buses are so much cheaper to implement and make a big difference in people's lives. I mean, these things change. Technologies change. Streetcars used to be the cheapest thing around 100 years ago. And it'll keep changing. But for now, I think the right progression is local bus route, rapid bus, BRT, SkyTrain, and then regional rail, which is something we don't have much of, but Lee Haber is here if you want to talk to him about that. There he is. Anyway, I gotta go. I'm getting the hook.
Thank you, Dennis.